Go outside on a clear night and look up. Find the constellation Taurus. Just to its right, you'll see a cluster of stars. Small, tight, unmistakable. Most people see 6 of them, though 7 are actually there. Astronomers call this the Pleiades. Almost every other culture in human history had a different name for it. They called them the 7 Sisters. And almost every culture that ever named them told the same story. The sisters are being chased. There is a man or a hunter pursuing them across the sky. One of the sisters is missing, hiding, weeping, or lost. That's the myth. Greek, Roman, Aboriginal Australian, Native American, Japanese, Maori, West African, Norse. Cultures separated by oceans and tens of thousands of years, none of them in any contact with each other, all of them telling the same story about the same 7 stars. The question isn't whether this is a coincidence. It can't be. The question is how old the story actually is. And the answer, when researchers finally calculated it, was the most unsettling number in the history of human culture. At least 100,000 years. The Greek version is the one most people know. 7 daughters of the Titan Atlas and the sea nymph Pleiades. Orion the hunter falls in love with them, or pursues them obsessively, depending on the translation, and chases them across the earth. Zeus takes pity on the sisters and transforms them into doves, then places them among the stars. But one of the 7, Merope in most tellings, hides her face in shame because she married a mortal man rather than a god. She is the sister you cannot see, the 7th star that is there but isn't. Now go to Australia. The Anangu people of Central Australia tell the story of the Kunkarunkara women. 7 sisters who travel together across the sky, fleeing a man named Nyiru, a sorcerer or spirit figure who desires them and will not stop pursuing them. The sisters run. Nyiru follows. And in some versions of the story, one of the sisters is caught or separated from the group. The cluster in the sky is their journey. The pursuer is nearby, in the same position relative to the Pleiades that Orion occupies in the Greek sky. Same cluster, same pursuit. Same number of sisters, same missing one. Different continent. A culture separated from the rest of human civilization for somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 years. The Greek and Aboriginal Australian myths did not develop in contact with each other. There was no shared seafaring route, no exchange of stories, no common intermediary culture. The 2 traditions arrived at the same story independently, about the same stars, with the same structural details, across one of the longest cultural separations in human history. For most of the last 2 centuries, Western academics assumed this was parallel mythological development. Different cultures noticing the same stars and independently constructing similar explanations. The human mind follows certain patterns. We see clusters and imagine family groups. We see pursuit and imagine danger. Similar stories from similar cognitive impulses, nothing more. But in 2014, astrophysicist Ray Norris at CSIRO Australia and Indigenous astronomy researcher Duane Hamacher at the University of Melbourne published a systematic cross-cultural analysis of Pleiades mythology. What they found could not be explained by parallel development. The details were too specific. It wasn't just that the stars were called sisters in multiple traditions. It was that the number 7 appeared consistently. Even though most people can only see 6 stars with the naked eye under normal conditions. The 7th star, Pleiades, or one of the sisters herself, sits at the very edge of naked eye visibility. Under perfect dark sky conditions, in a world before any artificial light, it can sometimes be seen, but it's marginal. The kind of star you would only notice if someone told you to look for it. Which means the story, 7 sisters, not 6, was standardized at a time when the sky was darker than it is now. When the 7th star was visible enough to count and name and remember. Researchers estimate that atmospheric conditions and the gradual proper motion of the stars themselves place this observation at roughly 100,000 years ago. But the missing sister detail, pushes the implication even further. In the Greek myth, one sister is hidden in shame. In the Aboriginal Australian versions, one sister is separated or caught. In the Cherokee tradition of North America, the sisters are also pursued, and one is sometimes uncounted. In the Māori tradition of New Zealand, the number and the incompleteness of the group are acknowledged across certain tellings. The same asymmetry, the same sense that the cluster is not quite whole. Across cultures separated by every ocean on the planet, with no line of transmission between them, the same specific detail survives: 7 sisters, a pursuer, and one of the 7 somehow apart from the rest. Norris and Hamacher's conclusion was careful and precise. The best explanation for the distribution of this myth across cultures separated by 50,000 to 100,000 years was that the core of the story predated those separations entirely. The story was told before humans left Africa, before the ancestors of the Aboriginal Australians crossed into the continent they would inhabit for tens of thousands of years. Before the ancestors of the Greeks moved into Europe, before the ancestors of the Cherokee crossed into the Americas. Before any of the great migrations that spread humanity across every habitable surface of the planet had begun, someone looked up at the Pleiades and told a story about 7 sisters running from a man who would not stop chasing them. And that story survived, not in a book, not carved into stone, carried in the memory of every generation between then and now, spoken aloud, season after season, century after century, millennium after millennium, for a span of time that makes the entirety of recorded history look like an afternoon. The oldest written story humans have is the Epic of Gilgamesh, roughly 4,000 years old. The oldest cave paintings we've found are around 45,000 years old. This story may be more than twice as old as the oldest cave art we have ever discovered. It raises a question that academics have only recently begun to take seriously. How much else survived? If a single story about 7 stars can endure 100,000 years of oral transmission across every climate and continent on Earth, surviving ice ages, migrations, extinctions, and the collapse of every civilization that ever tried to write things down, what other information is encoded in myths that we have been dismissing as fiction? Researchers are already finding answers. Aboriginal Australian oral traditions describe the flooding of specific coastal shorelines at the end of the last ice age, coastlines that have been underwater for more than 7,000 years. Geologists mapped the descriptions and confirmed they are accurate. The geographic memories encoded in those traditions predate the construction of the pyramids by thousands of years. They predate the founding of any city on Earth. They predate agriculture itself. Oral tradition, practiced with sufficient care and ritual structure, is not folk memory in the loose sense we tend to use that phrase. It is a technology, a precise, tested, generational system for transmitting information across timescales that written language has only existed for a fraction of. And the 7 Sisters story may be the oldest surviving proof of what that technology can do. Somewhere in that 100,000-year chain is the person who first told it. We don't know their name. We don't know which language they spoke or which fire they sat beside. We know they looked up at a cluster of stars in a darker sky than any of us have ever seen. And they found 7 lights, and they made those lights into women, and they put a pursuer behind them, and they noticed that one of the 7 was harder to see than the others, and made that into the story too. And then they told someone. Who told someone? Who told someone? For 100,000 years, without a single written word, without a library or a temple or an archive, the story moved through the minds of every generation, of every people that descended from that first telling, and it arrived in Greece and Australia and America and New Zealand with its core intact. We did not invent storytelling when we invented writing. We did not begin to remember when we began to record. The human impulse to look up at the dark and make meaning out of it is older than agriculture, older than tools, older than anything we have ever called civilization. The oldest technology humans ever created wasn't a wheel, it wasn't fire, it was a story. Spoken once, somewhere in Africa, about 7 sisters running across the sky. And it's still here,